So intent was Frank upon solving the puzzle of Le Marchand's box that he didn't hear the great bell begin to ring. The device had been constructed by a master craftsman, and the riddle was this: that though he'd been told the box contained wonders, there simply seemed to be no way into it, no clue on any of its 6 black lacquered faces as to the whereabouts of the pressure points that would disengage one piece of this 3-dimensional jigsaw from another.
Isn't for your eyes.
This is the last time I will talk about that son of a bitch movie. This is a great way for me to finish off talking about Hellraiser. I mean, I'm doing it in the company of an awful lot of other people who have been involved in the making of those movies. And I've exhausted my observations. Probably exhausted them 5 years ago. I think in a way the movies belong to different people now. Maybe arguably they still belong to Doug, who has been the constant through all these movies, and is, after all, the icon at the heart of the Hellraiser movies. And they belong to the fans, and I think that's very important too. They belong to people who love those movies perhaps more than I do. The first movies you make, and this is a story you hear so often, so I think there's a commonality to it, are basically luck. And I had a friend who had a brother who had a friend. The friend was Oliver Parker, the brother was a guy called Alan Parker, and his friend was a fellow called Chris Figg. Chris Figg wanted to produce movies, and I wanted to direct a movie, and we were both, without any experience really in our fields. But 2 inexperienced people is always more interesting as a combination than one inexperienced person, and we kind of gave each other some courage, I think. Alan Parker, who's not the filmmaker Alan Parker, but a very first-rate guy, gave us some seed money to put together a package that contained a lot of drawings that I had done of the cenobite, so that I could help the anybody who wanted to invest in the movie have a sort of a vision of what we were trying to make. And it wasn't a very sophisticated package. It was the script. It was maybe half a dozen drawings and a couple of log lines, just trying to give people a sense of, well, this is what it could be. And we then, this is where the luck came in. Chris and I flew out here, and the first people we went to, New World rather, said, you know what, we'll do this.
When I first met Clive, I had gotten a phone call. I was at home, and Clive and Chris Figg had gone to Chicago, and they had gone to New York, and they had gone to Los Angeles trying to cast Kirsty. So I went down to the office immediately. I didn't know what the script was about. I didn't know anything. And I met him, and he was really enthusiastic, and he was really communicative, and he just said to me, okay, your Uncle Frank is in your father's skin, and he wants to kill you and have sex with you. And tell me how you feel about that. And then he gave me the sides, and I felt it when I was there. There was just like a really nice kind of understanding and openness, and like a creative kind of cohesion.
If I'm remembering this right, I believe I had a choice of playing one of the removal men who delivered the mattress to the house on Ludovico Street when Larry snags his finger and drips the blood that brings Frank back to life. Or this odd guy with no name under latex with a bunch of nails in his head. And I hummed and hawed about it. This was my first movie. And it seemed to me perfectly logical and reasonable that if I was going to be appearing on screen for the first time, it would be a good idea if people could see me and they would be able to recognize me. These are solidly good actorly decisions to make. And without hesitation, I would say if I had been being offered one of the male leads in the film, which I was not, but if I'd been being offered Frank or Larry as opposed to Pinhead, or as opposed to this lead cenobite, I would have taken the lead without a moment's hesitation, and I would have been dead wrong.
I think when people came out of Hellraiser for that first time, they saw it, they probably said, hey, check out the guy with the pins in his head. I mean, I think that's what they were saying. I didn't really have a sense that that was what was going to happen. I would love to say that, oh yeah, because it was all planned. It wasn't. But I did know that we were going into taboo areas, we were going into forbidden areas, which classically is what good horror movies do.
Historically, we had Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, and then later on, you know, Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers, and along comes Pinhead. And it seems to me that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what everyone connected to ultimately, is this new unusual thing that obviously touched a chord, you know, fulfilled a void, I guess.
In my end of the industry, people are always coming to me and they're saying, you know, we want something that's really scary, we want it really disturbing, but we want it beautiful. And that's a very, very difficult thing to accomplish. And Clive accomplished it absolutely with perfection with Pinhead. That's an image that I think this entire generation will never forget, and generations to come.
One of the things that makes Pinhead so much more interesting, in my opinion, than Freddy or Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees is that you feel he's a man of the world. He's seen it all and he's bored with it all. And I think that's kind of interesting.
95% of what Pinhead is what Doug Bradley brings to the role. But I was very surprised what how different his performance was. It was very general-like. It was very someone who stood back and had control, and that brought a great strength to the character and a great appeal of that strength. And Doug's voice was just fantastic. When you hear him, and he has those wonderful lines, the whole thing just grew and grew. So I think the look was one thing, but if the wrong actor had been wearing this, Pinhead would never be the success that it is.
We have such sights to show you.
Every inch of its head had been tattooed with an intricate grid, and at every intersection of horizontal and vertical axes, a jeweled pin driven through to the bone. Its tongue was similarly decorated. Do you even know who we are?
As far as I recall, I think he was away for 4 or 5 weeks, and we had one meeting where he gave me some very clear indications of what he would like, and then I stayed here and did my research. He gave me the PFIQ magazines and I produced the drawings. My notes say that he wanted, 1, areas of revealed flesh where some kind of torture has or is occurring, 2, something associated with butchery involved, and then here we have a very Clive turn of phrase. I've written down repulsive glamour. And the other notes that I made about what he wanted was that they should be magnificent super butchers. There would be 1 or 2 of them with some hangers-on, as he put it, and there would be 4 or 5 altogether.
We would start roll in there about 4:30 or 5 in the morning. Meet Bob and the guys from the image animation, who'd then slap on a bit of black makeup around my mouth and put on the skull cap, force that onto the head. Then usually they go off and work on probably Dougie or Grace, because their makeups were far more complicated than Nick's and mine. And then finally they get to the bit I dread. The mask was skin tight because it was made for my face inside of it. And it usually took about 2 or 3 people to pull it down over the top of my head. And it used to take a minute or 2 for it to actually get into place. But within that minute there'd be a section where your nose was covered and your mouth was covered and you just knew you couldn't breathe. And that was a bit scary. Finally it would get into place and there you'd sit in complete isolation for 12, 14 hours a day.
Filming is a lot about waiting around for things to happen, and then you just do a little bit and then you're back in the dressing room again. So we got on very well, and the whole makeup for all the cenobites was done in this 2 rooms. And it was a good laugh. As I say, I got into lots of trouble with the sound man because my laugh tends to carry large distances.
Nick and I, Nick who plays Chatterer, we've been at drama school for 3 years together before we were working on this, and we come into the makeup in the mornings. I don't know, 4 or 5 in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, and none of the other actors were particularly either. So there was a really nice calm atmosphere in the morning. Everybody was very quiet, and the poor old makeup team had been up like hours before us, so they were very quiet, and there was usually nice classical music playing in the background. But Nick has got so much energy. And he'd bound in at 4 in the morning going, "Good morning, everybody!" and used to drive us all crazy because he was just so loud and so energetic, and you just wanted to hit him and say, "Shut up! It's 4 in the morning."
They're fucked up now and they were fucked up then.
Well, Bertha Frank, we'd already done it once. The first time we did it, it was a dried up corpse that came out of the walls. And none of us were very happy with this. And it was decided right at the end that we would go back and redo it and become this sort of visceral nightmare imagery. So it starts off with the floorboards themselves. So what we had is a rig to move the floorboards and little rigs to lift up and vibrate and lift up the nails, and as they dropped out. And then we had this wonderful super slime goo that we were pumping through, and it's not the easiest stuff in the world to pump because it's like pumping the thickest porridge you've ever seen. And that oozes up through the floors. Before that, the blood has already been sucked down and the goblets have been sucked up. Every single time, each of these were different rigs. There was a rig to make the floor shake, there was a rig to pump up through the floor, there was a rig to make the blood, which was shot in reverse. And then there's that wonderful, beautiful moment. And it's, I think, a lot down to how Robin lit this. It's beautifully backlit, and the 2 arms just shoot up, and then they have that moment where they hold there and they flop down to the sides. Then there's a lot of reverse photography going on, where what we actually did was destroy the rib cage, and we pulled strings out through wax while we had burners on them. So this whole stuff would then be shot backwards, and instead of it being destroyed, you'd see it starting to grow and blossom like flowers. And then you get the head appearing at the end, and it was all really stacked up that we wanted, each time we cut, we wanted to have another stage and show another technique and another texture to it. It's certainly the most visceral effect I've ever done.
it goes like this. Prosthetics was the question. Do you object to being buried alive in a sea of rubber, which is what I was, because they had to do a head cast of me, all right? And that was a freaky thing. I couldn't take all that. It was sort of straws up the nostrils and trying to breathe through this plaster cast. So I'm afraid I blew that. It didn't matter. The main body costume was prefabricated around my form, and I got into that as a sort of bodysuit for each morning's work. But the head, as a result of not being able to make a complete pull-on fit, had to be done, in sections, bit by bit, each morning. And this was the bit. 6 hours of 6 hours in makeup. Unit car used to pick me up at 4 in the into production village Cricklewood, and Bob Keane and Cliff Wallace, who was Cliff was my personal creator, whacked on these several bits of latex rubber in very thin film, cheeks, head, different sections for different parts of the head, which was a long, grueling process. Glue, gunge, and 6 hours whittled down after we'd got up and running. We got it down to about 4 in the end.
There's a description in the Hellbound Heart of what the cenobites look like, and it indicates that they're sort of what we would now call modern primitives. I mean, there's a whole movement, isn't there now, of people who've made an art form of their own bodies, piercing, scarification, brandings of various kinds. Back then it was much, much harder to see that. There was much less of that around.
Hellraiser is like a breeding ground for our imaginations for our next performance. You watch one of those and you're like, oh my God, I'd love to do that. We can do that. You see it in the movies, and they're pulling the flesh, and the flesh is coming out, and there's hooks in it, and it's all these great visual images that are just terrifying, but it's something that we can do, and we're like, oh cool, let's do that next weekend.
Clive's imagination has helped us build a reality. We've taken what he's imagined and gotten so drawn to it that it's become a reality. Imaginations like that help us find new ways to push ourselves.
To do what we do.
Certainly Hellraiser holds its place among the best, the most interesting, the most original, the most ideas-driven horror movies of the last 30 years.
I don't think we knew, or I think we thought it was going to be a good film. We thought it was going to be an original film, but to think it was going to be as big now, I think you couldn't possibly. It was a tiny budget movie. I think we thought it was going to be a stepping stone to bigger projects. But it really caught the imagination of the audience, and it just disturbed them enough and touched on things which films had stayed away from. And it did feel a little bit like that when you're making it. There was always something a bit special, always feeling like you just don't really want to go here, but you want to put your fingers in.
I think we all look back on films that have truly disturbed us and terrified us, and you realize there are only a few every decade, you start with Psycho, and then some people would say Rosemary's Baby in the 60s, and some others, and you've got The Exorcist in the 70s and the 80s. It seems to me there's the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and there's Clive's movie, as the two films that were just absolutely extraordinarily disturbing and scary, and as far as I can tell, its reputation seems to grow year by year, and I'm happy to see that.
Everybody really just went there, everybody, and you don't get that a lot. You don't get that kind of commitment across the boards, and it works. People, I think, like the intimacy and the danger and the rawness and the ugliness that it's so grotesque that I think it's really beautiful, if that makes sense. It's so human and so flawed that it, I think, makes it more easily to relate to, because it's damaged and it's wounded and it's open.
Although one was in it, I'm not particularly a horror movie freak in terms of whatever the genre, going back to whenever. I've never been a sort of, I just happen to find myself in this thing. The end product, I mean, short of sort of talking, I don't know what the budgets were or whatever. All I know is that whatever they were and in the time we had, we got it in. And the end result was what it was. And we ended up with a cult horror movie classic.
We want the man who did this.
I think you could say something about the Clive Barker who wrote all those things and yes, made those movies, who is very different from the Clive Barker who's sitting here now. I mean, I think I was much more interested in shocking people. I was much more interested in breaking some boundaries down about what horror fiction could do. I think I was to some degree successful in that, and it's one of the reasons why I'm not interested in doing it anymore. I think that there's a very real chance I won't direct any more movies, and I will produce and continue to produce and write screenplays, but I don't know how many more movies I have in me as director. It was something of a grandiose hobby for me, and right from the beginning. I mean, I slipped into it by good fortune and rather quietly, and probably will slip out the same way.
If you're lying, it said, if you're trying to squirm your way out of this, deliver him alive to us then. Make him confess himself. And maybe we won't tear
your soul apart.
Oh, I know where Pinhead goes for me because I have the story halfway finished. And it will appear in print. And all I will say is that he will be very quiet when I've finished.
Jesus wept.